authorities have officially verified that the offspring of the notorious Mexican kingpin, El Chapo, was taken alongside several others during a mass abduction. It was 1 in the morning on August 15th, 2016, in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. A pair of luxury sport utility vehicles rolled to a stop right in front of the fanciest dining spot in town. Out jumped 7 guys packing serious firepower. Without missing a beat, they marched directly through the main entrance of La Leche. That pristine, completely white venue is located right on the premier strip of Puerto Vallarta. Back indoors, a massive birthday bash was totally going off. We are talking high-end bubbly, incredibly expensive timepieces, and a crowd of elites who have never heard the word no since the day they were born. Yet, the armed crew holds their fire. Nobody is shouting, either. These intruders operate with that terrifying, quiet confidence you only see when the attackers know perfectly well their targets are completely trapped. Barely 2 minutes later, the whole ordeal is wrapped up. Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Guzman, the offspring of El Chapo, and absolute heavyweights within the Sinaloa syndicate, find themselves marched straight out the door and forcefully shoved inside those waiting vehicles. They whisked them away into the dark Mexican streets. There was absolutely no phone call asking for cash, 0 ultimatums, and surprisingly little panic. They simply vanished without a trace. The initial blueprint was totally brutal: torture them for video confessions, and then publicly assassinate both heirs of the most legendary narcotics kingpin ever, right in the heart of that popular vacation hotspot. But let me tell you the actual story. It involves a massive double cross, extreme backstabbing, and a crazy power move that halted a massive bloodbath between the 2 most lethal syndicates on the planet, plus the wild tale of a guy locked up with absolutely 0 communication, firepower, or foot soldiers, who somehow still came out on top. So, let us dive right in. If you want to grasp the sheer importance of August 15th, 2016, you really need to picture the landscape exactly 8 months earlier. Specifically on January 8th, 2016, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman Loera, the mastermind who transformed the Sinaloa faction into an absolute financial juggernaut operating across 6 different continents, and the legendary fugitive who managed to break out of 2 high-level Mexican penitentiaries, the exact same ghost, who evaded capture for ages, and even sat down with actor Sean Penn for a massive magazine piece while dodging the law, finally had his luck run out. Authorities slapped the cuffs on him in Los Mochis, Sinaloa, during the wee hours of the morning, but only after an insanely brutal shootout involving the local military forces. They hauled him off to the Altiplano lockup initially, before relocating him to a totally different detention center up in Ciudad Juarez, subjecting him to the most intense, heavily fortified lockdown procedures the nation had ever rolled out for a single inmate. The ultimate underworld organization on the globe had officially lost its commander-in-chief, and this time, there was no going back. The absolute millisecond that Kingpin got tossed into his cell for that 3rd and permanent stint, absolutely everybody tied to the Sinaloa operation began wondering about one specific detail. Exactly who was calling the shots now? That detail is incredibly crucial. Seeing as the response kicks off the entire wild Puerto Vallarta abduction saga, the boss had 4 boys: Ivan Archivaldo, Jesus Alfredo, Ovidio, and Joaquin Jr. However, he also kept a fiercely loyal lieutenant nearby, an incredibly reliable enforcer he had worked closely with since the early 2000s. We are talking about a guy going by the name Damaso Lopez Nunez, universally known on the streets as El Licenciado, which translates to the attorney. The legendary boss placed so much faith in this dude that during his prior bust, back in 2014, the time he was nabbed right before his ultimate downfall, whenever the authorities grilled him about who would take over the throne, the kingpin allegedly replied, "Without a doubt, it will be my buddy Damaso." That attorney was whip smart, possessed a fantastic academic background, and previously served as the second-in-command for security over at the Puente Grande Penitentiary, which happens to be the exact same compound the boss notoriously broke out of back in 2001. Naturally, The lawyer was the mastermind who greased the wheels for that massive breakout. Pulling off that stunt solidified his unwavering devotion, immediately earning him a golden ticket into the syndicate's most exclusive ranks. Fast forward to 2016, and this guy commanded his very own private militia, controlled vast chunks of real estate down in southern Sinaloa and Baja California Sur, and harbored some incredibly massive aspirations of his own. Once the patriarch was dragged back behind bars in January 2016, the core bloodline operations were entirely expected to remain a rock-solid, unified front, the heirs operating on the left flank, the attorney holding down the right, basically functioning as one massive, cohesive unit managing the global trade while their top dog sat in a set. That was the absolute blueprint on paper. However, this is precisely where the plot goes completely off the rails. The attorney had zero interest in sharing the spotlight with a bunch of kids. He fully intended to sit on the throne entirely by himself. On the flip side, you had the younger generation, specifically the two oldest boys, Ivan and Alfredo, who had basically been learning the ropes and grinding away in the family enterprise for a very long time, and they flat out refused to take orders from a single living soul, completely ignoring the fact that this guy was their dad's absolute best friend. Consequently, you are left with a massive, ticking time bomb perfectly hidden right inside the organization, long before a single shot was ever fired. Meanwhile, chilling just over the regional border and closely monitoring the ensuing chaos, was an absolute predator who had essentially been biding his time for this exact opportunity. That individual happened to be Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, though, to the global public, he was notoriously recognized under the street moniker El Mencho. Let us unpack his whole deal real quick, seeing as the vast majority of folks living beyond the Mexican borders were totally clueless about this guy's identity back in 2016. Honestly, staying totally off the radar was exactly his preferred way to operate. Entering the world in 1966 down in Aguililla, Michoacán, situated right in the heart of the Tierra Caliente zone, which happens to be among the most severely impoverished and deadly stretches of the Western territories, he spent his youth harvesting avocados just to get by. The guy bailed on grade school entirely, snuck across the northern border undocumented during the 1980s, and spent years just scraping by and moving all over the state of California, engaging in the typical hustles people turn to whenever they are totally penniless and pushed to the brink, slinging low-level narcotics and running corner hustles. Naturally, he caught a charge and then wound up getting busted a second time around 1994. California courts ultimately nailed him on racketeering charges related to pushing heroin on the streets. He ended up doing a solid 3-year stretch behind bars in an American federal lockup, right before the feds booted him permanently back down south. For pretty much any other criminal, the narrative wraps up right there. However, El Mencho returned to his homeland and pulled off an incredibly unconventional pivot. The dude actually enlisted in the regional Jalisco law enforcement squad, spending his shifts absorbing exactly how municipal and state agencies functioned straight from the belly of the beast. He figured out exactly which politicians were willing to take a bribe, completely mastering the tactical mindset and everyday patrol routines of the local authorities. Following that educational stint, he ditched his badge and leaped headfirst right back into the underworld. Only now, he possessed an absolute masterclass understanding of how the other side played the game. He systematically clawed his way up the ranks of the Milenio faction, initially racking up bodies as their premier executioner, before ultimately transitioning into a top-tier management role. The moment that Milenio Syndicate totally shattered back in 2010 following the apprehension of their boss and the complete implosion of their hierarchy, Mencho flat-out refused to run and hide like the rest of the crew. Instead, he rallied the die-hard loyalists and forged an entirely brand-new, terrifyingly efficient empire from the ashes, bringing the Jalisco New Generation operation, better known as CJNG, into existence. Right from the jump, his approach to structuring an empire completely broke the mold of traditional narco syndicates, where bosses typically craved the spotlight, while others flaunted their cash, cruised in flashy rides, and shared content online. El Mencho took a completely different path. You can probably count the surviving pictures of him on one hand, and he absolutely refused to grant press access or attend any sort of social gathering. Word on the street was that he kept a surprisingly simple lifestyle, focusing on fitness and healthy eating while constantly bouncing between various safe houses hidden across Jalisco, Michoacán, Colima, and Nayarit. The guy was practically invisible, yet his organization made an undeniable amount of noise. Between 2010 and 2016, the Jalisco New Generation cartel exploded from a local outfit into a massive powerhouse operating in 28 of Mexico's 32 states, directly clashing with the Zetas. They also went head-to-head with the Knights Templar Syndicate. In 2015, they actually used a rocket-propelled grenade to take down an official Mexican military chopper, a totally unheard-of strike against the national government, all while dropping heavily produced internet clips that mirrored actual armed forces enlistment promos. Drug Enforcement Administration personnel noted that this crew managed to assemble the most rapidly expanding and heavily armed criminal syndicate in the country's recent memory. By 2016, a federal agent tracking Mencho's upward trajectory bluntly stated to Rolling Stone magazine that once Chapo got locked away, these new guys would take over completely, a prediction that Mencho himself fully recognized as truth. The only issue remaining was figuring out the perfect way to declare their dominance. Which brings us straight to the summer of 2016, with El Chapo locked up inside a highly secure facility out in Ciudad Juarez. His boys took the reins of the Sinaloa faction, mixing heavy partying with pushing weight and managing daily operations. All the while, El Licenciado kept a close eye on their antics from the sidelines, growing increasingly annoyed with every passing week until he executed a covert maneuver completely unseen by the broader criminal underworld at that moment. Instead of contacting authorities or reaching across the aisle to competing syndicates looking for a truce, he actually set up a secure WhatsApp chat, bringing together heavy hitters from various crews who shared a single unifying trait: they were absolutely sick of dealing with the Chapitos. That information comes straight from Damaso Lopez Serrano, better known as El Mini Lic, the son of El Licenciado, who ultimately turned state's evidence and shared these details with Vice News while living under federal protection in Los Angeles, revealing a roster that featured Gulf Cartel members, power players from the capital, Guerrero-based tactical operators, and even connections up in Canada. Several distinct underworld syndicates found themselves linked up within one secured messaging thread, all focused squarely on a single objective: permanently removing El Chapo's offspring from the board, a reality El Minilik stated without any hesitation. He openly admitted to being the one who orchestrated that specific gathering, noting that El Mencho's Jalisco crew served as a cornerstone of their new coalition. This exact detail completely turns the accepted narrative regarding that infamous evening down in Puerto Vallarta totally upside down. The Jalisco gang wasn't just pulling a solo mission. It turned out to be a highly synchronized master plan. You had Mencho's operators collaborating directly alongside a rogue element within the Sinaloa syndicate, aiming to eliminate the Guzman boys using both internal betrayals and external force, all at the exact same time. Seriously, the Chapitos were ultimately betrayed by their very own circle. So let's jump back to the scene in Puerto Vallarta. For roughly 7 days leading up to August 15th, a crew closely tied to the Guzman clan had been enjoying a seaside getaway. Even though that coastal city firmly belonged to the Jalisco cartel as part of Mencho's central domain, the vacation hotspot had long served as a peaceful middle ground. Heavy hitters from competing syndicates frequently stopped by to blow cash and relax, always making sure to keep their bloodshed far away from the sand. That unspoken code was widely respected, meaning the Chapitos either completely missed the memo that things had escalated or arrogantly assumed those guidelines simply did not apply to them. The first wave of the Guzman crew pulled up to La Leche restaurant right at 9:03 in the evening, followed by the second wave at 9:17 at night, and the final crew at 9:28, all gathering to ring in Ivan Archivaldo's 33rd trip around the sun. The entire motorcade that pulled into the valet drop-off consisted entirely of pristine, snow-white, high-end rides. The lineup featured a Cadillac Escalade, a specially modified Dodge Challenger featuring law enforcement upgrades, a bulletproof Land Rover, a Honda CR-V, and a Jeep Limited. They cruised straight down the primary strip of the resort district, acting exactly like they held the deed to the entire town. Once inside La Leche, The atmosphere felt entirely predictable for a spot celebrated for its incredibly stark, unblemished aesthetic. Every single surface was stark white from the floorboards to the rafters, looking impossibly clean, while the liquor poured freely and glasses clinked the exact type of evening that makes you feel totally untouchable. Sitting together that night were Ivan Archivaldo Guzman Salazar, his brother Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, and their older half-sibling Cesar, a Guadalajara-based building designer who had mostly steered clear of the illicit family trade, joined by various inner circle members and their female companions. But who was missing? Ovidio Guzman had indeed traveled down to the coastal city, but decided to hang back at their luxury suite instead of going out. Meanwhile, El Chapo's fourth boy, Joaquin Guzman Lopez, widely dubbed the Phantom of Culiacan because he could vanish without a trace, had entirely skipped the getaway, proving that pure chance is a crazy thing. The one crucial detail totally unknown to the siblings: their 16 armed guards. The ladies, or any other patrons dining at that spot, was the chilling fact that unseen eyes had been monitoring them every single second they spent in Puerto Vallarta, shadowing their steps, logging their rides, and writing down the exact moments they stepped out of the lobby, alongside their dining choices and preferred travel routes, proving Mencho's crew ran a full-blown intelligence operation on the Guzman party throughout their entire stay. By the second, they grabbed their menus at La Leche late on August 14th, rolling into the 15th. The opposing strike team had already mapped out their precise location and exact seating arrangements. April, the woman mixing drinks behind the bar that evening, shared with reporters and detectives later on that the crew felt an eerie vibe way before any shooters walked through the doors. It defied explanation, just a thick, heavy mood hanging over the room. The atmosphere completely shifted. It was that gut-wrenching sensation that hits your heart way before your mind even catches up. Right at the stroke of 1 in the morning, a pair of blacked-out sport utility vehicles rolled to a stop right in front of Leche on the main strip. A crew of 7 CJNG hitters stepped onto the pavement. This is a minute-by-minute breakdown of that 7-minute window, pieced together from security cameras, bystander testimonies, and the official probe. 1 in the morning, the 2 trucks park in front of the restaurant. The hit squad keeps their cool. Their firearms are out, but they aren't waving them around like amateurs. This isn't some petty stick-up. This is a highly coordinated grab. 1:01 in the morning, the armed crew walks right through the main doors of the diner. Not a single bullet flies, and nobody even yells. Onlookers claim the whole thing went down in such a blur that the majority of the dining room had zero clue what was unfolding until the dust had already settled. The CJNG squad zeroed in on their mark without missing a beat. They made a beeline for their destination, practically proving they either had the layout memorized, an informant on the payroll, or maybe a mix of both. 1:02 in the morning, the guys at the table get split up from the ladies. It was completely clinical and calculated. The females weren't harmed or grabbed at all. They were there for specific marks, not a bloodbath. 1:03 in the morning, looking completely rattled, Ivan Archivaldo is dragged right out of his chair. Jesus' Alfredo follows close behind. Even Cesar, the sibling who built houses and desperately stayed out of the family business, is swept up in the chaos. Terrible timing, awful location, and the absolute worst last name to have. The crew snags the rest of the guys hanging out with them, snatching a grand total of 6 individuals. 1:04 in the morning, the armed squad and their half-dozen prisoners march straight out the main doors. The siblings get shoved into the idling trucks. Behind them, 5 high-end cars, driven by the Guzman crew, sit completely ditched in the drop-off zone with their doors swinging wide. Cops eventually figured out that a single ride in that fleet sported fake tags from Jalisco. The snatch and grab crew hits the gas, merging onto the main drag before vanishing into thin air. 1:07 in the morning, chatting with the media 24 hours later, the guy who owns the joint summed up the whole ordeal using just a few syllables. Brutal yet flawless. From walking in to speeding off, the entire execution clocked in at under 120 seconds. 16 personal security guys. Literally the deadliest shooters in the country. And nobody pulled a trigger to fight back. Word on the street was that the CJNG unit hitting the venue actually rolled roughly 50 deep. way beyond the handful that actually stepped through the front doors. The bulk of the muscle hung back in the perimeter, holding down corners around the diner and the adjacent blocks. Totally prepped for a shootout if things went sideways, Guzman's security detail sized up the scene and quickly did the math, sparking a massive firefight against over 50 rival enforcers on a crowded vacation strip, with their employers caught right in the crossfire. Was a terrible move, so they backed off, letting El Chapo's boys get swallowed up into enemy turf. When the sun came up, Puerto Vallarta felt like an entirely new, terrifying place. Eduardo Almaguer, the top prosecutor for Jalisco, called a media briefing on August 15th, admitting that anywhere from 10 to 12 folks had been grabbed. The sheer panic of the moment made pinning down an exact headcount tricky at first. He verified the discovery of 5 ditched rides out front, including the one with fake plates, and stated that everybody caught up in the mess, both the guys taken and the ones doing the taking, looked like they belonged to warring underworld factions. He pretty much pointed the finger straight at CJNG, the heavyweight cartel in the region, without explicitly dropping their name. A journalist pressed him for a straight answer, and he gave it. Within moments, the military, naval force, federal agents, local cops, and the highest-ranking legal authorities in the nation flooded the zone. The massive manhunt sprawled across Jalisco and spilled into the surrounding regions. Meanwhile, the local travel bureau pumped out a PR memo trying to spin the whole thing as a one-off fluke. Jalisco's governor even hopped on social media to try and calm the nerves of locals and vacationers alike, but absolutely nobody was buying it. The news had already gone totally viral. Fast forward to August 16th, and authorities had officially nailed down who got snatched, relying on camera feeds, dusting for prints, and sifting through IDs left behind in those empty luxury cars. A bunch of the guys were packing fake papers, which threw a massive wrench in the gears early on. 29-year-old Jesus Alfredo Guzman Salazar, the baby of the family from the Kingpin's original marriage, was officially marked as abducted. Same deal for Ivan Archivaldo. Authorities eventually named the rest of the crew as Juan Daniel Calva Tapia, Josias Nahualli Rabago Borbolla, and Victor Galvan Urena. Every single one of them had deep roots in the Sinaloa syndicate. Not a single demand for cash came through. Zero communication from the snatch squad. For the detectives working the case, that silence spoke volumes. This play had absolutely nothing to do with a payday. Right around the same time, locked up tight in a Ciudad Juarez supermax, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman answered the most gut-wrenching call a father could ever get. His boys had been swiped, and sitting behind bars meant his hands were completely tied. At least, that's how it looked on the surface. But the actual behind-the-scenes reality, the stuff the public never hears about, is wild. The Fed's version of the initial blueprint is straight-up terrifying. An insider tied to the probe flat-out confessed to Rolling Stone that this was a murder plot from day one. The hit squad intended to grab the siblings, torture them for intel or forced admissions on tape, and finally put bullets in their heads. The ultimate goal was to put El Chapo's kids 6 feet deep on, taking place right in El Mencho's backyard. This was a clear warning to all the Mexican crime syndicates, demonstrating just how far the Jalisco New Generation cartel would go, while exposing the Sinaloa organization's vulnerability without their kingpin. However, the situation quickly shifted. To kick things off, even though he was locked up in a supermax facility completely cut off from the public, El Chapo began pulling strings. Keep in mind, this guy had already managed his international narcotics syndicate from behind bars on 2 separate occasions. His connections ran so deep that he easily bypassed the tightest security measures to smuggle his orders to the outside. Based on statements from El Mini Lic, the imprisoned boss reached out and squeezed every connection he had to secure his boy's freedom. The next move is completely crazy, as El Chapo managed to find a bargaining chip. His personal security detail, Ivan Gastelum, who went by the nickname El Cholo, happened to be doing time in the exact same penitentiary as El Mencho's kid, Ruben Oseguera Gonzalez, better known on the streets as El Menchito. The younger Oseguera had been sitting in a federal cell since 2015. Word is that the Sinaloa boss explicitly threatened to have El Menchito hurt or killed. using the boy's safety as his main bargaining tool. He basically told the Jalisco leader, "Give me my boys back, and your boy stays breathing." It was a brutal game of chess where a dad weaponized another man's incarcerated kid to bail out his own captured offspring. The stakes were absolutely sky high. Following that, Ismael Zambada, famous as El Mayo and the long-standing partner of El Chapo in the Sinaloa syndicate, entered the fray. Known for his calculated and low-profile approach while his partner soaked up the spotlight, this veteran boss took on the role of peacemaker. El Mayo's tentacles reached into every corner, allowing him to open a direct line to the Jalisco New Generation crew. He anchored discussions that, had they fallen apart, would have sparked the bloodiest syndicate conflict the country had witnessed in 10 years. These high-stakes talks dragged on for roughly 7 days. Finally, on Saturday, August 22nd, a full week following their abduction, Jesus Alfredo and Ivan Archivaldo Guzman walked free without a scratch, safely back in their home territory of Sinaloa. This information was verified by both a top-tier official within the federal government and someone directly tied to the Guzman inner circle, investigative reporter Anabel Hernandez, who maintained deep contacts right inside the syndicate's ruling family, backed up the story as well. Based on a federal agent's statement to Rolling Stone, the final settlement required handing over $2 million alongside a massive drug shipment to the Jalisco organization. However, the insider emphasized that El Mencho had zero need for the cash. The payout was purely a power move, a symbolic gesture rather than a financial necessity. So what did the Jalisco boss really walk away with? A prize far surpassing any monetary figure. He successfully broadcasted a massive flex to the entire criminal landscape. "Your dad is behind bars, and your security detail folded. You thought you could casually enjoy a party on my turf, but I strolled in and snatched you up without even pulling a trigger. Nobody is above getting grabbed." That federal informant who spoke to the magazine spelled it out perfectly. It was an undeniable warning. With your patriarch out of the picture, you kids are wide open. That chilling memo echoed through every illicit channel across the continent. Yet the wildest aspect was how this abduction fractured the Sinaloa organization permanently, and that massive internal rift was centered squarely on the very guy who orchestrated the entire trap. Once the boys were safely home, El Chapo dispatched a handwritten note from his cell directly to Damaso Lopez, his longtime confidant and right-hand man. The document supposedly laid out a blueprint for dividing leadership duties. El Licenciado was instructed to keep his authority, but he'd have to split the crown evenly with the boys. The directive basically begged them to function as a united front. The imprisoned boss allegedly penned, "Just you and my 4 boys." But sharing wasn't on El Licenciado's agenda. He craved absolute command and secretly maintained his under-the-table pact with the Jalisco crew. He launched a massive smear campaign, paying cyber mercenaries to manipulate social platforms so the brothers looked like federal snitches, while simultaneously trashing their reputation on gangland forums to alienate them from the criminal community. His master plan involved tricking law enforcement into taking the brothers out, leaving the top spot wide open for him to steal. Moving ahead to February 2017, the brothers claimed Damaso requested a face-to-face gathering, pitching it as a chance to smooth over the abduction drama and make peace. The young men arrived at the spot, only to find El Licenciado nowhere in sight. Instead, they were greeted by his hit squad. Based on correspondence Ivan and Alfredo eventually leaked to the press. The trap was designed to assassinate both them and El Mayo in one fell swoop. The hit was botched. Despite taking some damage, the young men managed to flee through the rugged terrain on foot. Rumor has it that El Mayo also took a bullet during the chaos. That crossed line effectively finished El Licenciado's career, as the entire organization violently ousted him. Fast forward 3 months to May 2nd, 2017. National authorities raided a residential complex in the capital and successfully apprehended Damaso Lopez Nunez. Law enforcement tracked him down because one of his own cyber mercenaries flipped, using tracking software on a mobile device to record him and handing that evidence straight to the cops. Authorities shipped him off to America, where he admitted to narcotics charges, eventually turning state's evidence to help convict El Chapo during the 2019 federal court proceedings in Brooklyn. As for his kid, El Mini Lic, He waved the white flag at the American border midway through 2017, barely 6 months following that disastrous assassination attempt. The guy literally strolled right up to the Calexico crossing and handed himself over to custom. Federal prosecutors described the event as completely unheard of, marveling at a top-tier syndicate boss willingly throwing in the towel, spilling everything he knew. He earned a spot in a protective program near Los Angeles, eventually sitting down with Vice News to drop the most comprehensive insider breakdown of those wild days in August 2016. Taking a step back, we need to examine how this abduction completely redrew the Mexican underworld's territorial boundaries. Prior to August 15th, 2016, everybody pretty much accepted a standard narrative. The Sinaloa syndicate ruled the yard as the undisputed heavyweight, while the Jalisco cartel played the role of the aggressive up-and-comer. A massive turf war seemed inevitable. Yet the old guard maintained more than enough deep-rooted networks and physical ground to keep the throne. Following the events of August 15th, 2016, those old assumptions went straight out the window. The upstarts strolled right into a rival stronghold, snatched up the crown princes, kept them detained for 7 days, and let them go strictly on their own conditions, sending a massive tactical warning rather than just making a statement. If they could easily grab El Chapo's boys straight out of a crowded celebration protected by 16 armed guards, absolutely nobody was safe. And federal drug enforcement statistics perfectly illustrate the ensuing fallout. From 2016 through 2019, this new syndicate played a direct role in 75% of all gang-related murders south of the border, expanding their geographic dominance at a terrifying pace. During the window spanning 2015 to 2019, the nationwide murder average spiked dramatically, from 15.1 up to 28.2 fatalities for every 100,000 citizens. That staggering surge in violence perfectly mirrored the rapid outward push of their new empire, ultimately putting both rival organizations on perfectly equal footing by the early 2020s. These two primary powers essentially carved up the nation, claiming somewhere between 30 and 35% of the country's entire landmass for themselves. We officially entered the modern age beyond El Chapo, heavily driven by El Mencho's absolute influence, while the abducted brothers used that terrifying experience to aggressively fast-track their own rise to power. After completely decimating the forces backing El Licenciado back in 2017, Ivan and Alfredo cemented themselves as the unquestionable bosses of the organization alongside El Mayo, quickly establishing highly advanced synthetic fentanyl production facilities throughout Culiacan, significantly upgrading their smuggling routes across both oceanic and airborne channels, and transforming into the precise type of incredibly well-oiled criminal enterprise that government attorneys would later dedicate countless hours attempting to tear down. Authorities nabbed Ovidio Guzman during 2023, whereas his brother Joaquin Guzman Lopez found himself handcuffed in 2024 following an incredibly shady situation that heavily reeked of an inside job. Rumor has it that trusted members of his own crew intentionally baited him straight into the hands of law enforcement. The past often repeats itself, considering El Chapo famously faced deportation to American soil during January 2017, before receiving his guilty verdict from a New York jury in February 2019. Today, he sits locked away for a lifetime, plus an additional 30 years inside ADX Florence, that notoriously inescapable federal compound out in Colorado, which coincidentally also holds his longtime sworn enemy, El Licenciado, meaning two of the most notorious crime bosses to ever walk the earth are now rotting away on permanent bids inside that exact same Rocky Mountain fortress. Meanwhile, El Mencho managed to spend the better part of 10 years as the single highest value target being hunted south of the border. American federal drug agents literally hung a massive $15 million reward over his head, marking it as one of the largest bounties historically assigned to a solo fugitive. The kingpin dodged the authorities for so long by completely rejecting the stereotypical flashy underworld existence, entirely avoiding luxury mansions and massive posses. Instead, he opted to constantly relocate throughout the rugged highlands of Jalisco, accompanied only by a tightly knit, incredibly dedicated crew. He battled a renal condition so allegedly debilitating that his people literally constructed an entire secret hospital hidden away in the Jalisco countryside just to manage his health. Fast forward to February 22nd, 2026, barely 14 days ago, when armed national forces officially neutralized him during a tactical raid located in Tapalpa, Jalisco. As for his boy, El Menquito, he has remained securely locked up in American federal lockup ever since 2019. Authorities scooped up his spouse before letting her walk, while his daughter currently faces ongoing probes. Yet the massive criminal network he engineered remains fully operational. Federal intelligence indicates the enterprise now functions almost like a corporate fast food chain, branching out to encompass roughly 90 different subgroups. However, the ultimate shot caller has checked out permanently, taking his final breath in the exact region he fought his whole existence to dominate. Ultimately, the true takeaway from August 15th, 2016, becomes clear when you view the broader context. It was never merely a simple abduction. That precise incident marked the definitive death of the traditional chain of command within the underground cartel system, the core belief that the Sinaloa syndicate enjoyed absolute invincibility, or that carrying the Guzman surname served as bulletproof armor, along with the myth that El Chapo's kids possessed free reign to roam any town, completely untouched. All of those assumptions vanished right through the entrance of La Leche at 10:04 in the morning, never to return again. El Mencho essentially weaponized the event to broadcast a massive warning: here is the new empire, and this demonstrates my absolute power. Yet the craziest detail involves the simple fact that despite possessing terrifying amounts of leverage and authority, pulling off that stunt absolutely required backstabbing from a trusted ally. Had Damaso Lopez not leaked crucial details, formed a secret alliance over text messages, and supplied the necessary insider facts, the entire evening would have played out entirely otherwise. Every single underworld faction absorbed a massive takeaway from that Puerto Vallarta incident, a brutal reality they continually face. The actual danger that demands your utmost paranoia almost never approaches from an external enemy line. Your greatest vulnerability rests with the guy sharing your meal, making toasts at your celebrations, and grinning warmly at you while secretly cutting deals with your fiercest rivals. The famous brothers ultimately suffered treason at the hands of a guy their own dad considered blood. Rather than crushing their spirits, that massive double cross essentially transformed them into cold-blooded savages. The betrayal offered the exact sharp focus required to purge their ranks, allowing them to construct an even tougher, remarkably streamlined, and intensely brutal machine compared to their dad's legacy. As for El Mencho, that soft-spoken guy from Aguililla who originally spent his days harvesting avocados, the guy who caught a California trafficking charge and spun it into a massive underworld operation, walked away with exactly what he set out to grab. He firmly held the crown, right up until the nation's military cornered him high in the Jalisco mountain ranges on a Sunday dawn in February 2026. It is impossible to outline the history of present-day Mexico, the current state of illicit smuggling, or today's brutal turf battles without focusing on the 15th of August, 2016. That single evening entirely shifted the paradigm. If you are curious about the entire saga of what the Chapitos faction constructed next, rising from snatched celebration guests to synthetic product bosses managing a footprint over 6 distinct continents, sound off in the replies to show your interest. Make sure to tap subscribe so you are fully prepared for when we explore that topic. Also, chime in below and share who you believe ultimately walked away victorious from that evening's intense chaos. Huge thanks for tuning in. They sat under the pristine white lights of La Leche, dripping in gold and sipping liquid ego, convinced that their last name was a bulletproof vest. But the cruelest irony of the underworld is this: your shadow is the only thing you can truly trust. The kidnapping of the Chapitos wasn't just a tactical strike. It was a masterclass in the fragility of power. While Ivan and Alfredo toasted to another year of life, the man their father called blood, Damaso Lopez, was already trading their souls over a secure text thread. This is the glamour the movies won't show you. A world where loyalty is just a currency that devalues the moment you turn your back. Look at the end game. There is no retirement plan in the shadows. Whether you are a legend like El Chapo or a predator like El Mencho, the road always terminates at the same two destinations: a cold, 6 by 9 concrete cell in Colorado, or a lonely grave in the dirt. True legacy isn't built on fear or synthetic empires. It's built on the peace of mind that comes from a life lived in the light. In the end, even the fiercest kings are just men waiting for the inevitable tap on the shoulder. Choose a path where you don't have to look behind you.